Okay, this tutorial is on graphing non-proportional linear equations when you're given an equation and you must complete a table of values. So here we have a table. We got an equation y equals negative 2x plus 10. I've supplied you with the x values, and I want you guys to give me the values of y when you substitute for the x values. So the first thing you want to do is write your original equation. Y equals negative 2x plus 10, and the x value is going to be negative 9. So we're going to substitute it. Instead of negative 2 times x plus 10, it's going to be negative 2 times negative 9, the value substituted, plus 10. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply first, because we have multiplication and we have addition. And in the order of operations, we multiply first before addition. So a negative times a negative is a positive. And 2 times 18 is positive 18, so we end up with y equals positive 18 plus 10. And from here, you guys know what to do. 18 plus 10 is 28, so we end up with y equals 28. And we fill in our value and start our next problem by writing the original equation down. Again, we are starting with y equals negative 2x plus 10. This time our x value is going to be negative 8. So we're going to take negative 8 and we're going to substitute it. Instead of negative 2 times x plus 10, it's going to be negative 2 times negative 8 plus 10. Again, we're going to multiply first before we add, and negative 2 times negative 8, well, negative times a negative is a positive, 2 times 8 is 16, so what we end up with is y equals 16 plus 10, and 16 plus 10 we all know is 26. So we end up with y equals 26. So when x equals negative 8, y equals positive 26. And we start off with our final x value of positive 8. Once again, we substitute. Instead of negative 2 times x plus 10, we are going to substitute negative 2 times positive 8 plus 10. We're going to multiply first. Negative 2 times positive 8 is negative 16. Because a negative times a negative, negative times a positive is a negative, and 2 times 8 is negative. And then we end up with y equals negative 16x plus 10. In my class, we use war and peace. We box our terms, and we ask ourselves, are they at war or they're at peace? Well, they're at war. Negatives have more. How many more? 6. So we end up with y equals negative 6, and we have completed our table with the values of negative 9, 28, negative 8, 26, and 8, negative 6, which we end up graphing at a later date. Now sometimes we have fractions. Well, I taught you guys to use fraction busters. What you want to do is you want to use multiples of the denominator in order to cancel out the fraction, or bust the fraction as I call it. So I've supplied you with multiples of the denominator 5. Once again, we start off with our original equation. Y equals negative 1/5 times x plus 7. The first value we're going to substitute for x is going to be positive 35. So we substitute positive 35, but this time I'm putting it over 1, because when we multiply whole numbers by a fraction, we always put it over 1. Now, we're going to multiply before we add again. But this time, I'm not going to multiply here. I like to do my work on the side. Now I already put my negative sign because a negative times a positive is negative, and I'm going to go ahead and do my work on the side. Again, a negative times a positive is negative, and you should see that the 5 and the 35 have a common factor of 5. And so most of you guys call it cross-canceling, so you can see that 5 goes into 35 7 times. You multiply your numerators, you end up with negative 7 once, which is negative 7. And then you continue on with your problem by bringing down the plus 7. So we have y equals negative 7 plus 7. Those of you that know me, again, I use war and peace. We box our terms. Are they at war? They're at peace? They're at war. Who's going to win the war? Nobody. And when nobody wins the war, we end up with 0. So y ends up equaling 0 when x equals positive 35. I'm going to go ahead and erase my work on the side so I can continue working on the next problem, when we're going to substitute negative 15 for x. Again, you write your original equation down. You're going to substitute, instead of negative 1/5 times x plus 7, it's going to be negative 1/5 times negative 15 plus 7. We're going to multiply first before we add, and a negative times a negative is a positive, and I'm going to go ahead and do the work on the side. Negative 1/5 times negative 15 once. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, and you can see that the 15 and the 5 have a common factor of 5, or as you guys call it, you can cross cancel. 5 goes into 15 3 times, and you end up with negative 1 times 3 on your numerator, and a 1 times 1 on your denominator, and you end up with, that's negative 1 times negative 3 on your numerator, and you end up with positive 3 once, which is positive 3. And then you write that in, and you use War and Peace. Now, I used War and Peace here, but everybody knows that 3 plus 7 equals 10. So when x equals negative 15 in this equation, y ends up equaling positive 10. I'm going to go ahead and erase and write down my original equation so I can substitute the last value, which is a fraction buster because it's a multiple of 5, of negative 40. So once again, we substitute y equals negative 1/5 times negative 40 plus x instead of negative 1/5 times x plus 7. So again, we're going to multiply first before we add and subtract. A negative times a negative is a positive, and I'm going to go ahead and complete the work on the side, but I don't have any room, so I'm going to go ahead and do it on the top. Negative times a negative is a positive, and you can see that 5 and 40 can cross cancel. The 5 goes into 48 times, and if you multiply your numerators, you end up with negative times a negative, which is a positive. 1 times 8 is 8, and you end up with 8 once, which just is 8 because I was running out of space. And then we can continue on our equation by adding 8 plus 7, and we end up with y equals positive 15. So you fill in your table, and you end up with a value of 15 when x equals negative 40. Thank you. Alright, thank you for watching this video, and hopefully there'll be many more.